Prophet ﷺ is born in that year. Amina now is without husband. According to Amina herself, she actually saw a light so bright that she could see the Christian castles of Busra, which is in Syria, which is another important place. Bahira, the monk, is there, and it also comes up again in the signs of the end of time. She heard a voice say to her, "You are carrying in your womb Sayyid al-Qawm, the Sayyid of this people, the master of this people, and when he is born, say that you protect him, place him in protection of al-Wahid, from the evil of every envier, min sharri hasidin idha hasad, wa sammihi Muhammadan," and name him Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ibn Ishaq relates that. Now, she actually gives birth to him. Abdul Muttalib is overjoyed that his beloved son Abdullah, who dies, nonetheless has a son. And at the same time, when he married Amina's cousin Hala, he also has his last son, which is Al-Abbas. So this is important. Abbas is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, but is born at the same time as the Prophet ﷺ. And he's a little older than the Prophet. He's just a few years older. And he actually greets the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Abbas, in that story. So now the Prophet ﷺ is born, and he's in the household of his grandfather Abdul Muttalib. But what was the tradition of the Arabs is that they would send their children to be wet nursed by Bedouin. And the reason for that is that the cities tended to be reasonably unhealthy. I mean, think about now. You know, if they literally considered like Mecca to be an unhealthy environment because they said the air was not a good air. There were too many people living in it, so the anfas polluted the air. And they felt that the sedentary life was not healthy because they didn't move a lot. They tended to be less. I mean, now people sitting all day long and things like that. You know, so you can imagine the difference then. Anyway, what would happen is that the Bedouins would come into Mecca, and women would sit with their children. Now, the Bedouin would look to see the powerful families, because it's important to note the Arabs have a concept of ihsan prior to Islam. And the idea was, if somebody gives you a good turn, you have to give them a good turn as well, as a way of mukafa'ah, paying back. So it's not that they did things solely for that reason, but they recognized that that was part of their social structure. And this, still to this day, like when I was in Arabia, in Mauritania in the desert, one of the things I was always struck by was the generosity of the Bedouin. When you would you'd just be traveling and come to some tents, and they'd say, "Oh, well, let's go and spend the afternoon in the tents till the sun goes away." They'd sacrifice a goat for you. They'd treat you like a king and all these things. And I asked Abdullah one time, you know, why do they do that? I mean, what's really the impetus behind it? And he says, well, first of all, karam, the idea of karam. It's important for him to display his generosity because it's from muru'ah, it's from the dignified nature of a person, and he prides himself in that he's kareem. But he said, but also, he's going to be in need sometime as well. And so he wants, and it goes back to the golden rule, do unto others, you would have them do unto you, right? And it's the same idea, is that you're going to be in need at some time. So hopefully, maybe one day you'll end up in that person's tent and they'll remember your ihsan to them. And so this is not really expecting immediate. Now, Abdullah did say to me also, which is interesting, he said, some people will actually will give them something at that time just so they don't have to worry about him showing up at their door sometime, right? So there really was that idea of mukafa'ah. And it's in the hadith. If somebody does you a good turn, kafi'uhu, then show him, reciprocate his good. وَهَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Is the reward of showing good to people other than the people that show good to you, that you show good to them, or that Allah shows good to you? Ahsan, kama ahsan Allahu ilayk. Show ihsan to people just as Allah has shown ihsan to you. He supported you, help other people. All these things. So they had this understanding. So what happens is, now at this time, another important thing to remember, this is an orphan now. Despite the fact it's Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib is getting old. He's already in his 70s. He's getting old. He is not going to be an important person. It's diminishing his authority in Quraysh. Also, from his sons, there's no one of great distinction that is really showing these kind of leadership qualities that are going to emerge. In fact, it's the Makhzumites now that are reemerging, and the Umayyads. Right? Now, what happens is that they get all these Qurayshi babies are taken by the different tribes. And Bani Sa'ad was one of the tribes that used to come down and take them. And Bani Sa'ad, it was a drought year. So the Arabs were having a hard time inside Mecca, but the Bedouin were also having a hard time outside. And Halima Sa'diyya mentioned that during this time, there was no kala, like fodder for the livestock, so that the milk wasn't there. She didn't even have milk from her breast very much to give her own child who she was suckling. And she goes in hoping to get a good child. They're all taken, and nobody's left except the Prophet ﷺ, who's with Amina, and he's an orphan. Right? And Amina doesn't have any money. And so Halima says to her husband, who's known as Ibn Abi Kabsha, she says to her husband, as they're about to leave, it's horrible that we're coming here and we came to get a child and we're going to go back without a child. And so she says, why don't we just take this orphan? Which is amazing also because her name, Halima, is somebody who's shows, concern and compassion for others. So this is definitely part of her nature. So she takes the baby, and Amina's pleased with this. Now, one of the things that she said also is maybe some barakah will come from taking. In other words, there's no material gain here, but maybe we'll get some barakah, some grace from Allah if we do, because it's an act of charity. She's recognizing we're being charitable, and maybe we'll get some ihsan from Allah. So there's a pure intention here. So she takes the child. Now, one of the things that happened is she had this wretched donkey that she rode into town with that was so emaciated it could barely move. And as they're going back with Bani Sa'ad, her donkey's ahead of all the other donkeys. And the women are saying, where'd you get that donkey from? She said, it's the same one I came with. And they said, what happened to it? Because they saw it. She was lagging behind. And now she's in the forefront because she had the Prophet ﷺ. And then the other thing she noticed is when she begins to suckle him, her breasts fill up. Right. So she's witnessing something interesting is happening here. And then when she goes in back to where Bani Sa'd is from, the other thing that happens, which is extraordinary, is that she sends her goats out and they come back full, whereas the other goats of Bani Sa'd are coming back empty. And so they start telling the shepherds, go where Halima's goats are going. And they do it, but the same thing happens. So this barakah is entering the house or the khayma, the tent of Halima Sa'di and her husband.